They said Adrien Hale was carved from the same ice that coated Blackridge Vale 9 months a year. They said his wife was a ghost. Beautiful, silent, already gone. But they were wrong about one thing. Ghosts don't walk away. Ghosts don't make choices. And on a March morning so cold the horses refused to leave the stable, Eliza Rowan Hale made the choice that would shatter the North's most powerful man. Not with tears, not with anger, but with the single most devastating weapon in existence, her absence. This is the story of a woman who learned to survive by disappearing, and the man who didn't realize he was dying until she was already gone. If you want to see how a man who controls everything loses the only thing that matters, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Adrien Hale learned young that attachment was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. He was 9 years old the first time he watched his father weep. Not from pain, the old Duke had taken a hunting arrow through the shoulder and barely flinched, but from something worse. A letter. 3 lines. His younger brother, lost to fever in the southern campaigns. Adrien had stood in the doorway of his father's study, watching this man who'd taught him to read tracks in snow and negotiate mining contracts with equal precision, watching him crumble over ink and paper. 2 months later, his father was dead. Not from grief, they said, from distraction. He'd been inspecting the northern timber operations when a widowmaker branch came down. Should have heard it. Should have moved. Didn't. Adrien was 10 when he became Duke of Blackridge Vale. He was 11 when he understood the real lesson. Love was a blade that cut both ways, and the only winning move was not to play. Now at 32, he'd built an empire on that principle. Blackridge Vale wasn't the kind of place that bred softness. It was 600 square miles of unforgiving territory where winter arrived in October and didn't fully release its grip until May. The summers were brief, brutal work seasons where every hand was needed to harvest timber, work the iron mines, and stockpile supplies for the next freeze. The people here were hard because the land demanded it. Weak things died. Soft things broke. Sentiment was a cancer that ate you from the inside. Adrien had taken his father's modest holdings and tripled them in 12 years. The Hale timber operations now supplied half the construction in the Eastern Territories. The iron mines had been modernized with equipment Adrien had personally designed after spending a winter working alongside the crews. The estate wasn't just profitable, it was a fortress of efficiency, every system optimized, every person serving a function, including his wife. He'd married Eliza Rowan for exactly 3 reasons, all of them practical. First, the Rowans controlled the southern supply routes his operations needed for export. Second, the marriage contract included water rights to the Clearbrook River, solving a decade-long dispute that had cost him thousands in legal fees. Third, his counsel had been increasingly vocal about the need for an heir, and Eliza was healthy, educated, and came from proven stock. Her mother had borne 6 children, 5 of whom survived to adulthood. She was also beautiful, but Adrien filed that under incidental benefits rather than deciding factors. The wedding had been efficient. 70 guests, 2 hours. A reception that served its political purpose without excessive indulgence. Eliza had worn ivory, not white, which Adrien appreciated as a practical choice given the likelihood of travel stains, and had smiled appropriately throughout. She'd spoken her vows clearly. She'd danced the required dances. She'd been perfect. That was 8 months ago. Now, on a morning in late March when the temperature had finally climbed above freezing for the first time in weeks, Adrien stood in his study reviewing supply manifests while his wife existed somewhere else in the house. He wasn't sure where. The morning room, perhaps? Or the library? She spent a lot of time in the library. Your Grace? His steward, Marcus Webb, entered without knocking. They'd worked together for 11 years. Formality had worn down to function. The equipment arrived from Pittsburgh. They're unloading at the North Warehouse now. The steam engines? All 3. Want to inspect them yourself? This afternoon. Adrien signed off on a timber contract without looking up. Schedule the installation crew for Monday. I want them operational before the thaw reaches full melt. Once the logging roads are accessible, I don't want to lose a single day of production. Done. Marcus hesitated. Also, your wife sent word. She's requested the carriage this afternoon, something about visiting the Thornton estate. Adrien's pen paused for half a second. Catherine Thornton? Apparently they've been corresponding. Fine. Tell Joseph to take the main road, not the river pass. It's still not safe. He returned to the manifest. Anything else? That's it. Marcus turned to leave, then stopped. She asked if you'd be joining her. I have the equipment inspection. I'll let her know. After Marcus left, Adrien allowed himself a moment of something that might have been discomfort. It passed quickly. Eliza had known what this marriage was when she agreed to it. Partnership, mutual benefit, respect. Those were the terms. She'd signed the same contract he had. If she'd expected something else, that was a failure of communication on her part, not a breach of contract on his. He'd been clear from the beginning. He'd told her father during the negotiations, I need a wife to manage the household and provide heirs. I can offer security, status, and material comfort. What I cannot offer is romance. Lord Rowan had laughed and said that was more honesty than most marriages started with. Eliza had been present for that conversation. She'd nodded. She'd understood. Or so he'd thought. The problem, if there was a problem, which Adrien wasn't entirely convinced there was, had started about 6 weeks after the wedding. Subtle at first. Eliza had suggested taking breakfast together. Adrien had explained his morning schedule began at 5 and included reviews of overnight reports from the mining operations. She'd suggested dinner then. He'd pointed out that dinner was when he met with department heads to address issues that had arisen during the day. She'd asked about evenings. He'd been honest. By evening, he was too mentally exhausted for conversation and preferred to work alone in his study. She'd taken it well, he thought. No tears, no accusations, just a small nod and a quiet, I understand. After that, she'd stopped suggesting things. Adrien told himself this was ideal. They'd found their equilibrium. She managed the household staff with impressive efficiency. The estate ran more smoothly now than it had under his mother's tenure. She'd reorganized the kitchens, implemented a new inventory system, and somehow reduced food waste by 30% while actually improving meal quality. She'd also taken over correspondence with suppliers for household goods, freeing up Marcus to focus on industrial operations. She was objectively exactly what he'd needed in a wife. The fact that they rarely spoke seemed like a reasonable price for that efficiency. Your Grace? Helen, one of the housemaids, appeared in the doorway. Pardon the interruption. Her Grace asked me to inform you she's departing for the Thornton estate. Adrien glanced at the clock. 2 hours had passed. The morning had disappeared into paperwork, as mornings tended to do. Thank you, Helen. Is Joseph prepared? Yes, sir, though... Helen hesitated in a way that made Adrien look up. What? It's just... Her Grace seemed quite excited about the visit, sir. Mrs. Thornton sent a letter yesterday mentioning some sort of literary discussion circle they're forming. I thought you might want to... That is, I thought perhaps you'd want to... She fumbled to a stop under Adrien's flat stare. I have an equipment inspection scheduled. Her Grace is perfectly capable of managing social calls without my supervision. Of course, sir. I only thought... Helen. His voice didn't rise, but it hardened. Is there something about the carriage preparation that requires my attention? No, sir. Then I believe we're done here. She left and Adrien returned to his paperwork. But his concentration had fractured. He found himself staring at a shipping invoice without processing the numbers. His mind caught on something he couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Guilt required wrongdoing, and he'd done nothing wrong. Unease, perhaps. The sense that something was slightly off balance in a system that should be running smoothly. He pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. The view overlooked the south gardens, where spring was just beginning to assert itself against winter's retreat. Patches of dead grass showed through melting snow. The ornamental trees Eliza had planted in November stood bare-branched and waiting. She'd ordered them from some specialty nursery in Virginia, had spent hours planning the layout with the groundskeeper. Adrien had approved the expense without much thought. It was her domain, and the cost was negligible. He could see her now, standing by the carriage. She wore a dark green traveling dress with a wool coat over it. Practical clothing for the unpredictable weather. Her hair was pinned up in some complicated style that probably had a name he didn't know. From this distance, he couldn't see her expression. Joseph helped her into the carriage. She settled onto the seat, arranging her skirts. The door closed. The carriage rolled forward, crunching over gravel and thin ice. She didn't look back at the house. Adrien watched until the carriage disappeared around the bend in the drive. Then he returned to his desk and the equipment inspection he'd been planning. The steam engines wouldn't evaluate themselves. The logging operations wouldn't optimize their own schedules. The empire he'd built required constant attention, constant maintenance, constant control. He was good at control. It was everything else he'd never learned to do. Yeah. The equipment inspection went well. The steam engines were exactly what he'd ordered, American-made, top-of-the-line, with the modifications he'd specified for cold weather operation. Adrien spent 2 hours with the installation crew, walking them through the setup requirements, answering questions, making notes on adjustments that would be needed for the mounting systems. This was the work he understood. Mechanical problems had mechanical solutions. Every system had an optimal configuration. You identified the variables, tested the outcomes, and implemented what worked. No ambiguity, no guesswork, just math and physics, and the satisfying certainty of engineered solutions. By the time he returned to the main house, the sun was setting, and his wife's carriage was already in the drive. She must have returned while he was at the warehouse. He should probably check in with her, acknowledge her return. That seemed like the kind of thing a husband did. He found her in the library. She was sitting in the window seat with a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was staring out at the darkening grounds, her profile silhouetted against the last of the daylight. She'd changed into a simpler dress, something in soft gray wool that made her look smaller somehow. Younger. Almost fragile, though he knew that was an illusion. She'd survived 8 months in Blackridge Vale. Fragile things didn't last 8 weeks. How was your visit? The question came out more abrupt than he'd intended. She turned, startled. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise? Hope? But it smoothed out so quickly he might have imagined it. It was lovely, thank you. Her voice was pleasant, empty. The same tone she used with the servants. Catherine is starting a reading circle. We're beginning with Mrs. Gaskell's work, North and South specifically. Do you know it? No. It's about industrial England, the conflict between mill owners and workers. Catherine thought it might interest me, given she gestured vaguely, encompassing the estate, the operations, everything Adrien had built. Given our circumstances. I see. Silence fell between them like snow. Adrien searched for something else to say and came up empty. He should ask about the book, or comment on the reading circle, or inquire about Catherine Thornton's health. These were the kinds of conversational moves people made, the social lubricant that kept interactions from grinding to a halt. He couldn't make himself care about any of it. The steam engines arrived, he said finally, because at least that was real information. Oh? From Pittsburgh, the ones I ordered for the logging operations. They'll increase efficiency by 40% once they're installed. That's good. She watched him with an expression he couldn't read. Will it change things for the workers, the efficiency increase? Some reduction in manual labor, reallocation to other tasks. Net employment should remain stable. I see. More silence. This time, Adrien recognized the conversation was dead, and there was no point in trying to revive it. I have work to finish before dinner. Of course. He was halfway to the door when she spoke again. Adrien? He turned. She was standing now, the book closed in her hands. The dying sunlight made her hair look copper instead of brown. Yes? She opened her mouth, closed it. Something that might have been pain crossed her face, quickly suppressed. Never mind. It's not important. He waited a moment longer, but she'd already turned back to the window. Whatever she'd been about to say had passed. Adrien returned to his study and the work that made sense. Behind him, in the library, his wife stood alone in the growing dark. Neither of them turned on the lamps. April came in cold and stayed that way. The thaw that should have arrived in full force sputtered and stalled, leaving the landscape in an awkward state between winter and spring. Patches of snow lingered in the shadows. The roads turned to mud, then froze again at night, creating ruts that made travel dangerous. The Clearbrook River rose with meltwater but stayed sluggish, chunks of ice still floating in the current. Adrien barely noticed. The delays in the logging operations meant restructuring the entire production schedule. He spent 14-hour days at the work sites, coordinating crews, solving equipment problems, managing the 1,000 small crises that arose when you tried to impose efficiency on nature's timeline. Eliza, as far as he knew, continued managing the household. He signed off on her expenses without reviewing them in detail. The numbers were always reasonable, and he trusted her competence. They crossed paths occasionally at dinner when his schedule allowed him to eat at normal hours. The conversations were polite and meaningless. How was your day? Fine. Yours? Fine. The lamb is excellent. I'll pass your compliments to Cook. Sometimes Adrien wondered if she was unhappy. Then he decided it didn't matter. Happiness wasn't part of the contract. Security was status, comfort, all of which he provided in abundance. If she wanted emotional satisfaction, she'd married the wrong man, but that was hardly his fault. He'd been clear about his limitations. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, because he was never present long enough to witness it, was the way Eliza changed. The staff saw it. Helen mentioned to Joseph that her grace seemed quieter lately. Joseph mentioned to Marcus that she'd stopped asking about his grace's schedule, stopped trying to coordinate their presence at meals. Marcus said nothing, because Marcus had worked for Adrien long enough to know that his employer didn't want to hear about things that fell outside the realm of operational efficiency. The truth was that Eliza had made a decision somewhere in those cold April weeks. Not a dramatic decision, not a break or a confrontation, just a quiet internal shift from trying to building to simply existing. She stopped leaving books out that she thought Adrien might enjoy, stopped mentioning interesting articles she'd read that related to his work, stopped suggesting they take walks when the weather cleared, stopped asking questions about his day that went beyond surface pleasantries. She'd learned the hardest lesson there is: you can't make someone love you. You can't negotiate affection or schedule intimacy or create connection through sheer force of will. All you can do is offer yourself. And if the other person doesn't want what you're offering, you can either keep offering until you've given everything away, or you can stop. Eliza stopped. She poured her energy into the things she could control. The household ran like clockwork. She expanded the kitchen gardens, planning a layout that would provide fresh vegetables well into the fall. She worked with the seamstress to create a new uniform system for the house staff that was both more practical and more dignified than the old one. She organized a lending library for the estate workers' families, donating her own books and soliciting contributions from other northern families. She stayed busy. She stayed useful. She stayed distant. And Adrien, wrapped up in timber contracts and equipment failures and production schedules, noticed none of it. Not until the dinner party. Catherine Thornton's dinner party wasn't supposed to be significant. It was one of those periodic social obligations that the northern families maintained to prove they were civilized, despite living in what the southern territories considered a frozen wasteland. 20 guests, good food, the kind of conversation that was supposed to be witty without being controversial. Adrien attended only because his refusal would have been politically awkward. The Thorntons controlled significant timber rights on the eastern borders of Blackridge Vale. Catherine's husband, Robert, sat on the Regional Commerce Council. These were relationships that required maintenance. Eliza had seemed pleased when he agreed to attend. Or perhaps not pleased, her emotional register had become difficult for him to read, but something. Relieved, maybe. They took the carriage together, sitting on opposite sides. Eliza wore something in deep blue silk that Adrien vaguely recognized as expensive. She'd spent time on her appearance. Hair arranged in some elaborate style, a necklace that might have been pearls. She looked beautiful, he supposed, in the abstract way he might appreciate a well-designed building or a perfectly balanced equation. Catherine mentioned she's invited several people from the eastern families, Eliza said as they rolled through the dark. The Ashfords, I believe, and possibly the Mercers. The Ashfords have a son who's been studying engineering in Boston. He might be interested in discussing your new equipment installations. Adrien glanced at her. You've been talking about my equipment? Catherine asked how the estate operations were going. I mentioned the efficiency improvements you'd implemented. I see. Silence. The carriage wheels crunched over half-frozen mud. I thought you might enjoy meeting him, Eliza said quietly. Someone who shares your interests. I'm not attending for entertainment. No, of course not. Something in her tone made him look at her again, but her face was turned to the window, watching the dark landscape slide past. The Thornton house blazed with light and warmth. They were greeted at the door by Catherine herself, a round, cheerful woman in her 50s who clasped Eliza's hands like they were long-lost sisters and gave Adrien a look that was friendly but assessing. "Duke Hale, so glad you could join us. Eliza talks about you constantly." "Does she?" Adrien kept his expression neutral. "Oh, yes. We hear all about the innovations you're implementing. Quite fascinating." Catherine leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "Between you and me, you've given my Robert no end of grief. He keeps saying, 'Why can't we modernize like the Hales?' I tell him it's because he's not married to a genius." She winked at Eliza. "You're a lucky woman." Eliza smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Very lucky." They were absorbed into the party. Adrien found himself in a conversation with Robert Thornton and two other men about timber tariffs and export routes. Useful conversation, the kind that might lead to better contract terms or new shipping arrangements. He engaged fully, tracking the various interests at play, identifying opportunities for mutual benefit. Across the room, Eliza stood with Catherine and several other women, teacup in hand, nodding along to some story about someone's daughter's wedding plans. She looked, Adrien thought distantly, like she was drowning in air. Dinner was the usual affair. Adrien found himself seated between Mrs. Ashford, who wanted to talk about her son's engineering studies, and Lady Mercer, who wanted to talk about the scandal involving the governor's secretary. He managed both conversations with the minimum required engagement, eating efficiently and waiting for the evening to end. It was during the after-dinner gathering that things shifted. The men had reconvened in Robert's study for port and cigars. Adrien was listening to a tedious story about shipping insurance disputes when the door opened and a young man entered. Mid-20s, Adrien estimated. Well-dressed, confident stride. The son, presumably. "Father, gentlemen," he nodded around the room. "Mother sent me to inform you that the ladies have commandeered the music room and are demanding we join them for whatever entertainment they've planned." Robert groaned good-naturedly. "Duty calls, gentlemen." They filtered out. Adrien considered making his excuses. He'd fulfilled his social obligation and had reports waiting at home, but leaving early would be noted. He followed the group to the music room. Eliza was at the piano. He hadn't known she could play. That information had never come up, and he'd never asked. But there she was, fingers moving over the keys with casual competence, playing something Adrien didn't recognize, something complex. The other women were gathered around, some singing, some just listening. She looked different, alive in a way she never looked at Hale House. Her face was animated, focused. When she reached the end of the piece, the room applauded, and she laughed, actually laughed, a sound Adrien realized he hadn't heard in months. "Beautiful, Eliza," Catherine beamed. "You absolutely must play another." "Oh, I couldn't. Please, Mrs. Hale." The Ashford son had materialized at the piano. "I've been dying to hear a proper interpretation of the new Brahms pieces. I don't suppose you know them." "I have the sheet music at home, but I haven't mastered them yet." "You're being modest. I heard you play. You have excellent technical skill." He smiled and Adrien recognized the expression. Interest. The kind of interest that went beyond music appreciation. Something cold settled in Adrien's chest. "Perhaps if you have time tomorrow you could show me your sheet music collection?" The young man, what was his name? Thomas? Timothy? Leaned against the piano. "I'm attempting to learn the same pieces, and I'd value your opinion on the interpretation of the second movement." "I'd be happy to." Eliza glanced at Adrien, a quick, automatic check-in. "If my husband doesn't object." All eyes turned to him. Adrien felt the weight of expectation, the social pressure to be gracious, accommodating. He also felt something else, something he didn't have a name for but didn't like. "We'll be busy tomorrow," he heard himself say. "Estate business." Eliza's eyes widened slightly. "We will?" "The supply inventories. I need your input." It was a lie, but it came smoothly. "Perhaps another time, Mr. Ashford." The young man straightened, sensing the frost in Adrien's tone. "Of course. Another time." The moment passed. Someone else sat at the piano. The party continued, but Adrien found himself tracking Eliza's movements for the rest of the evening, noting who she spoke with, how long those conversations lasted, whether anyone else looked at her the way the Ashford boy had. It was absurd. She was his wife. Contract or not, distant or not, she was his. The idea of some overeducated boy from Boston sniffing around her was offensive on multiple levels, not least because it suggested Adrien wasn't adequately managing his own household. On the ride home, Eliza was quiet. Adrien was quiet. The space between them felt charged with something neither acknowledged. "I didn't know you played piano," Adrien said finally. "You never asked." The words hung in the air, not accusatory, just factual, devastating in their simplicity. "I suppose I didn't." "No." More silence. The carriage hit a rut, jolting them. Eliza steadied herself against the seat. "You told him we were busy tomorrow," she said. "We're not, are we?" I needed an excuse. "Why?" Good question. Adrien didn't have a good answer. "Because I don't want him near you, because watching him look at you made me want to break things. Because for the first time in my life, I felt something I couldn't control, and I hated it." "It seemed inappropriate," he said instead. He was being overly familiar. He was being friendly. It was more than friendly. And if it was? She turned to look at him directly for the first time. "Would that matter? You're my wife. By contract. Is there another kind?" Eliza stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. "No, I suppose there isn't." They didn't speak again until they reached Hale House. Eliza went directly to her rooms. Adrien went to his study, poured himself a whiskey, and tried to focus on the shipping reports that needed review. He couldn't focus. His mind kept returning to the music room, to Eliza's face when she played, to the young Ashford's smile, to his own inexplicable rage at watching another man show his wife the attention he'd never bothered to provide. Outside, the April wind rattled the windows. Inside, Duke Adrien Hale, who had built an empire on control and calculation, sat alone in the dark and wondered if he'd made a mistake. The worst part was, he still couldn't name what kind of mistake it was. But somewhere in the vast, empty house, his wife was making calculations of her own. And when Eliza Rowan Hale set her mind to solving a problem, she solved it, even if the problem was herself. The change in Eliza didn't happen overnight, and that was precisely why Adrien missed it. If she'd collapsed in tears or thrown dishes or screamed accusations, he would have noticed. Drama was visible. Drama demanded response. But Eliza didn't collapse. She simply withdrew. Like winter fog lifting so gradually you don't realize the landscape has changed until you look up and the world is suddenly, irrevocably different. May arrived with the kind of weather that made people in Blackridge Vale cautiously optimistic. The last snow melted. The mud dried enough for heavy equipment to move without sinking. The Clearbrook River ran clear and fast, swollen with runoff. Adrien threw himself into the delayed logging operations with the single-minded focus that had built his empire, working 16-hour days at the timber camps, sleeping in the field office more nights than not. When he did return to the main house, to sign documents, review household accounts, change clothes, Eliza was always perfectly pleasant. She'd ask if he needed anything. She'd inform him of household developments that required his approval. She'd smile that empty smile that never quite reached her eyes. He told himself this was fine. This was what he'd wanted. A wife who understood her role and performed it without unnecessary emotional complications. He was an idiot. "Your Grace," Marcus appeared in the study doorway one evening in mid-May. Adrien had been home for 3 hours, a record lately, and was buried in contract negotiations with a Pittsburgh steel manufacturer. "Got a minute?" Adrien didn't look up. "If it's about the northern boundary dispute, tell Carver I'll review his survey maps tomorrow." "It's not about the boundary." Something in Marcus's tone made Adrien set down his pen. His steward looked uncomfortable, which was unusual. Marcus had worked in the mines before Adrien promoted him. Men who'd spent years underground didn't get uncomfortable easily. "What is it?" "It's about your wife." Adrien's jaw tightened. "If there's a household issue she's perfectly capable of..." "She fired Janet." "Who?" "Janet, the head housekeeper, been with the estate for 12 years. Marcus crossed his arms. Gave her 2 weeks severance and a reference letter. Janet left this morning. Adrien processed this. Did Janet do something that warranted dismissal? According to your wife, no. According to Janet, Her Grace decided the household would run more efficiently with a different management structure. Marcus paused. But here's the thing. Janet told me your wife barely looked at her when she delivered the news. Just handed her the letter, thanked her for her service, and walked away. Janet said it was like being dismissed by a stranger. Perhaps Janet is simply bitter about. It's not just Janet. Marcus sat down without being invited. Another sign this was serious. The staff are talking. They say Her Grace has become different. Not cruel, not harsh, just absent. Like she's going through the motions, but there's nobody home behind her eyes. Adrien felt that cold thing from the dinner party settle deeper in his chest. She's been under stress. Managing an estate this size. She was managing it fine before. Better than fine. Now she's managing it like she's running a military operation. Everything by the book. No flexibility, no warmth. Helen said yesterday she found Her Grace standing in the garden, staring at nothing for 20 minutes. When Helen asked if she needed anything, your wife didn't even seem to hear her at first. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you what I'm seeing. Marcus leaned forward. Look, you didn't hire me to kiss your ass. You hired me because I tell you things you need to hear. So here it is. Your wife is not okay. And the staff are starting to notice. And when the staff notice things, other people notice things. And when other people notice things, it becomes a problem. Adrien wanted to argue. He wanted to dismiss this as household drama that didn't require his attention. But Marcus wasn't the type to waste time on trivia, and the cold thing in Adrien's chest was spreading. I'll speak with her. When? When I have time. Marcus stood. Your funeral. He headed for the door, then stopped. You know what Janet said to me before she left? She said, His Grace has built himself quite a fortress here. Pity he locked himself inside it. He shrugged. Just thought you should know. After Marcus left, Adrien sat in the silence of his study and tried to remember the last real conversation he'd had with his wife. Not logistics, not household business, an actual conversation. He couldn't. The realization should have bothered him more than it did. Instead, he felt mostly irritated. At Marcus for bringing it up, at the staff for gossiping, at Eliza for apparently having some kind of crisis that was now interfering with his work schedule. He had timber contracts to finalize. He had equipment installations to oversee. He had an empire to run. His wife's feelings were not part of that equation. He returned to his paperwork and pushed the conversation from his mind. 3 days later, Adrien attended a regional commerce meeting in Millbrook, the largest town in the Northern Territories. These quarterly gatherings were necessary evils, tedious affairs where local landowners and business operators pretended to cooperate while actually maneuvering for advantage. Adrien usually found them mildly insufferable, but politically useful. This one was different. He arrived late due to equipment delays at the Western Timber Camp. The meeting was already in progress when he slipped into the back of the assembly hall. Robert Thornton was at the podium discussing shipping routes. Adrien found a seat and prepared to endure 2 hours of posturing and procedure. Which brings us to the question of worker accommodations. Robert shuffled his papers. I believe Duke Hale has implemented some innovative programs at Blackridge Vale. Perhaps he'd like to share his experience? Adrien stood, automatically shifting into the mode he used for these gatherings. Confident, factual, unassailable. We've upgraded the worker housing at all 3 timber camps. Improved insulation, better heating systems, shared mess facilities with trained cooks. Productivity increased 18% in the first quarter after implementation. At what cost? The question came from Edmund Carver, who owned the rival timber operations on the eastern border. Carver was old money, old methods, and deeply resentful of Adrien's success. Initial investment was significant. Long-term savings in reduced injury rates and turnover more than compensate. Easy to throw money at problems when you have it. Carver's smile was thin. Some of us have to maintain profit margins. Some of us understand that investing in workers is maintaining profit margins. A few chuckles from the assembly. Carver's face reddened. Interesting perspective from a man who treats his own household like a business ledger. The room went quiet. Adrien felt every eye on him. Excuse me? I'm simply noting the irony. Carver leaned back in his chair, enjoying himself now. You're quite vocal about worker welfare, yet your own wife is apparently so neglected that she's... Careful. Adrien's voice dropped to the register that made hardened miners step back. Very careful where you take this. But Carver, stupid or brave or both, pressed on. I'm merely repeating what everyone's been discussing. The Duchess Hale has been seen about town looking unwell, pale, thin, quiet. Catherine Thornton mentioned she barely speaks anymore. Even at social gatherings, she just sits and, my wife's health is not your concern. No? Because there's been talk about how you leave her alone for weeks at a time, about how she wanders the estate gardens at odd hours, about how the servants say she seems like a... Adrien moved before he'd consciously decided to. He was across the room and had Carver by the collar before the older man could finish his sentence. The chair tipped backward. Carver hit the floor with Adrien standing over him. You will not, Adrien said, each word carved from ice, speak about my wife again. Not in this room. Not in your home. Not anywhere. Am I clear? Hands grabbed his arms. Robert's voice in his ear. Adrien, let him go. Come on, let him go. Adrien released Carver and stepped back. The assembly hall was silent except for Carver's wheezing breaths. Everyone stared. The men holding Adrien's arms released him slowly, watching to see if he'd lunge again. This meeting is adjourned, Robert announced. We'll reconvene next quarter. People began filing out, giving Adrien a wide berth. He stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. He didn't lose control, ever. That was the whole point. Control was everything. Control was survival. Robert appeared at his elbow. My office, now! They walked in silence through the empty corridors of the assembly building. Robert's office was small but well appointed. He closed the door, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and handed one to Adrien without comment. He's an ass, Robert said finally. Yes. But he's not entirely wrong, is he? Adrien drank the whiskey in one swallow. It burned. My marriage is not a topic for public discussion. No, it's not. Robert refilled Adrien's glass. But here's the thing about being a duke in a territory this small. Everything you do is public. Your successes, your failures, your wife standing in the garden at midnight in her nightgown because she can't sleep. Adrien's hand tightened on the glass. That's gossip. That's truth. Catherine's maid saw her, told Catherine. Catherine told me because she's worried. Robert sat on the edge of his desk. Look, I'm not here to tell you how to run your marriage, but I am here to tell you that people are noticing. And when people notice, it becomes my problem too because I have to maintain order in these meetings, and I can't do that if you're assaulting other members. He provoked, yes. He did, deliberately, and you gave him exactly the reaction he wanted. Robert's expression softened. Adrien, you're the smartest man I know. You've built something remarkable here, but you're missing something that's right in front of you, and I'm not sure you even know what it is. Adrien set down the glass harder than he intended. If you have something to say, say it. Your wife is drowning. Everyone can see it except you. And the reason you can't see it is because you're not looking. Robert held up a hand before Adrien could respond. I know what you're going to say. That your marriage is functional, that you provide for her, that she knew the terms. But Adrien, providing for someone isn't the same as seeing them. And if you don't start seeing her, you're going to lose her. She's not going anywhere. Isn't she? Robert's eyebrows rose. The woman Catherine knew 10 months ago was bright, engaged, curious about everything. The woman she sees now barely speaks, barely eats, goes through social motions like she's reading from a script. That's not a wife adapting to a new life. That's a woman disappearing. The cold thing in Adrien's chest had become a vice. What do you want me to do? I don't know. That's your problem to solve. But solve it soon, because this... Robert gestured at the space where the confrontation had happened. This is what happens when you ignore problems until they explode. And next time, it might not be Carver's collar you grab. It might be something you can't walk away from. Adrien left without another word. The ride back to Blackridge Vale took 2 hours. He spent them staring out the carriage window at the landscape rolling past. Forest, clearings, the distant mountains still capped with snow. His empire, his territory, everything under control. Except it wasn't. The realization sat in his chest like lead. By the time he reached the estate, the sun was setting. He went directly to his study, intending to lose himself in work the way he always did. But for the first time in years, he couldn't focus. The words on the contracts blurred. His mind kept returning to Robert's words. "Your wife is drowning." Was she? He pushed back from his desk and went looking for her. He found her in the conservatory, a glass-walled room at the back of the house that his mother had used for exotic plants. Eliza had taken it over in March, turning it into something between a garden and a sanctuary. She was sitting on a wrought iron bench, surrounded by greenery, holding a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when he entered. No surprise, no pleasure, no just acknowledgement, like he was a servant reporting for duty. "Adrien, I need to speak with you." "Of course." She set the book aside and folded her hands in her lap. Perfect posture, empty expression, a doll waiting for instructions. He sat across from her on another bench. Up close, he could see what he'd been missing from a distance. She was thinner, not dramatically, but noticeably. Her cheekbones were sharper. Her wrists looked fragile. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup didn't quite hide. "Are you well?" The question felt inadequate the moment it left his mouth. "Perfectly." "You look tired." "I've been managing the household. It requires attention." "Yes. I heard about Janet." Something flickered in Eliza's expression. "She was inefficient. I found a better system." "Marcus says the staff are concerned." "The staff will adjust." Adrien searched for the right words and found none. "I spoke with Robert Thornton today. He said Catherine is worried about you." "How kind of her." "Eliza." He leaned forward, trying to bridge the distance that seemed to have opened between them. "If something is wrong, you can tell me." "Why?" The question hit like a slap. "Because you're my wife." "By contract." She met his eyes directly for the first time. "You've made it very clear what that means. Security, comfort, respect. Those are the terms. I'm fulfilling them. You're fulfilling them. What more is there to discuss?" He faltered. "People are saying you're unhappy." "And does that matter to you?" Her voice remained level, polite, devastating. "Does my happiness affect the timber yields, the mining profits, the efficiency of your operations? That's not fair, isn't it?" She stood, moving to one of the plant tables, adjusting leaves that didn't need adjusting. "You're right about one thing. I signed the contract. I knew the terms. The mistake was mine, not yours. I expected something that wasn't offered. I've corrected that error." "Corrected it how?" She turned to face him. In the fading light through the glass walls, she looked almost translucent. "I stopped wanting things I can't have. I stopped hoping you'd suddenly become someone you're not. I accepted reality." A thin smile. "You should be pleased. It's very efficient." Adrien felt like he was watching someone die in slow motion. "I don't want What don't you want?" She waited. When he didn't answer, she nodded. "You don't know. That's the problem, isn't it? You know what you want from everything else in your life. Your timber operations, your mines, your equipment. But me?" She gestured at herself. "You never figured out what you wanted from me beyond household management and potential heirs. So I've narrowed my focus to what I can actually provide. Everything else, I've let go." "I provide for you." "Yes, you do. Beautifully." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "You've given me security and status and material comfort. Everything you promised. The fact that I'm starving to death has nothing to do with you." The words hung in the air between them. Adrien wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that he'd never meant for this, that he'd thought they had an understanding, that she'd agreed to the terms. But looking at her face, seeing the exhaustion there, the resignation, the absolute absence of hope, he couldn't find the words. "I should let you rest," he said finally. "You look tired." "Yes, I am tired." He stood, crossed to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Eliza. Yes? I'm sorry. She laughed. It was the saddest sound he'd ever heard. For what? You haven't done anything wrong. That's the whole problem. He left her in the conservatory, surrounded by living things she'd cultivated and tended, because at least plants responded when you cared for them. June arrived with summer heat that turned Blackridge Vale from frozen wasteland to barely temperate wilderness. The logging operations hit full stride. The mines increased production. Adrien's empire hummed with efficiency. Everything was going according to plan. Everything except his marriage. He tried, in his limited way, to fix things. He started taking dinner at home more often. He asked Eliza about her day, though her answers were always brief and uninformative. He approved every household expense she submitted without question. He even suggested, awkwardly, feeling like he was attempting a language he'd never learned, that they might attend the Midsummer Festival together. If you'd like, she'd said, though I've already made arrangements with Catherine. We're helping organize the children's activities. I could still, don't trouble yourself, I know you're busy. And that was that. She'd smiled her empty smile and drifted away, leaving Adrien standing in the hallway feeling like he'd failed a test he didn't know he was taking. The worst part was that she was right. He was busy. The summer months were critical for stockpiling supplies before the next freeze. Every day counted. Every decision mattered. He couldn't just abandon his responsibilities because his wife was… what? Sad? Lonely? He didn't even know the right word for what was happening to her. The night of the Midsummer Festival, Adrien worked late at the field office, reviewing production reports. By the time he returned to the main house, it was well past midnight. The festival had ended hours ago. The house was dark and silent. He found Eliza in her room. The door was ajar. She was sitting at her vanity, still in her festival dress, something pale and flowered that made her look younger than her 24 years, slowly removing hairpins. She looked exhausted, more than exhausted, hollowed out. He knocked softly. May I come in? She didn't turn. It's your house. He entered anyway, closing the door behind him. In 8 months of marriage, he'd been in her private chambers perhaps 3 times, always for formal business. Standing here now felt strange, intrusive. How was the festival? Fine. Did the children's activities go well? Yes. He moved closer, watching her reflection in the mirror. She continued removing hairpins, her movements mechanical. Eliza. Look at me. She did. Their eyes met in the mirror's reflection. For a moment, Adrien saw it, all of it. The pain she'd been carrying, the loneliness, the slow death of hope. It was there in her eyes, naked and raw, and he finally understood what everyone else had been trying to tell him. He'd broken something, not with cruelty or neglect in the traditional sense, but with absence, with emotional starvation, with the steady accumulation of days where she'd woken up alone and gone to bed alone and spent every hour in between learning that reaching out only led to empty air. I'm sorry, he said, and this time he meant it, really meant it. I'm so sorry. For what? Her voice was flat. You've done nothing wrong. You've been exactly what you promised to be. The failure is mine. No. Yes. She turned on the bench to face him directly. I loved you. That was my mistake. I saw you at our wedding, so self-contained and strong and brilliant, and I actually thought that if I was patient enough, good enough, useful enough, you might eventually care for me. Not love, necessarily. I wasn't naive enough to expect that. But care. Notice me. See me as something more than a household manager who shares your last name. I do see you. No, you don't. She stood and he realized she was shaking. You see a function, a role, the person who runs your home and will eventually bear your children. But me? The woman who plays piano when she's nervous? Who reads poetry late at night because it's the only time she feels anything? Who stands in the garden at midnight because the emptiness of her room is too much to bear? She shook her head. You've never seen that person. And the worst part is I don't think you want to. That's not… Adrien fumbled for words, his legendary control completely shattered. I don't know how to be what you need. I know. And there it was. Understanding, forgiveness, and grief all wrapped in two quiet words. That's why this has to end. His blood turned to ice. What? Not the marriage. I'm not leaving. She smiled bitterly. The contracts are too complex and I have nowhere to go. But this, she gestured between them, this hope that something might change, that has to end. For my own survival, I have to let it go. Eliza, please. I've already let it go, Adrien. That's what you're seeing. That's what everyone's been trying to tell you. I'm not drowning anymore because I stopped fighting the current. I just let go. She walked past him to the door, opened it, stood waiting for him to leave. Her face was calm, empty, the face of someone who'd already made peace with something unbearable. Adrien wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to do something, anything, to reverse whatever had happened. But he'd spent his entire life building walls, and now they were working exactly as designed, keeping him safe, keeping him isolated, keeping him from reaching the one person who tried to reach him. He walked to the door, paused beside her. I don't want to lose you. You can't lose what you never tried to keep. The door closed behind him. Adrien stood in the hallway, listening to the lock turn. For the first time in his adult life, he had no plan, no strategy, no clear path forward. He'd built an empire on control and calculation, and none of it meant anything in the face of what he'd just lost. Behind the locked door, Eliza leaned against the wood and slowly sank to the floor. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears weeks ago. She just sat there in her festival dress, hairpins scattered around her like fallen stars, and tried to remember what it felt like to want something. She couldn't. Outside, summer heat pressed against the windows. Inside Hale House, two people who shared a name and a contract but nothing else sat on opposite sides of a locked door, each alone in the vast, cold fortress Adrien had built. The difference was that only one of them had realized fortress walls don't just keep threats out. They keep everything out, including life itself. Adrien didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study with an untouched glass of whiskey and watched the sky shift from black to gray to the pale, uncertain blue of early dawn. Somewhere in the house, his wife was doing the same thing, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until she could reasonably pretend to be functional. They'd become experts at pretending. The summer wore on. The logging operations exceeded projections. The mines hit record production numbers. Adrien attended meetings, negotiated contracts, solved problems with the mechanical precision that had made him successful. And every night he came home to a house that was perfectly maintained by a wife who'd become a ghost. He tried talking to her. 3 times in the week following their confrontation, he'd sought her out, once in the library, once in the conservatory, once at breakfast when he deliberately adjusted his schedule to be present. Each time she'd been polite, pleasant, utterly unreachable. How are you feeling? Fine, thank you. I thought perhaps we could ride out to see the eastern timber stands. You mentioned wanting to see them. That was months ago. I'm sure you're very busy. Eliza, I'm trying. I know, it's kind of you, but there's really no need. It was like trying to hold water. The harder he grasped, the faster she slipped away. Marcus noticed because Marcus noticed everything. Still not fixed, I see. It's complicated. No, it's not. You're just making it complicated. Marcus dropped a stack of equipment orders on Adrien's desk. But that's your business. My business is telling you we've got a problem at the northern camp. Adrien seized on the distraction gratefully. What kind of problem? Safety kind. Jenkins reported 3 equipment failures in the past week. Steam pressure valves malfunctioning. Could be faulty parts, could be sabotage. Sabotage? Adrien looked up sharply. From whom? Carver's operations have been hiring away our experienced crews. Maybe they're playing rougher than that. Marcus shrugged. Or maybe it's just bad luck in Chinese manufacturing. Either way, you should inspect personally before someone gets hurt. Adrien spent the next 4 days at the northern timber camp, personally examining every piece of equipment, interviewing workers, tracking down the source of the failures. It was sabotage. Crude, but effective. Someone had been tampering with pressure release mechanisms, creating conditions that could lead to catastrophic boiler explosions. He fired 3 workers with ties to Carver's operations, implemented new security protocols, and upgraded to redundant safety systems. Problem solved. Crisis averted. Another victory for systematic thinking and decisive action. It didn't make him feel better. He returned to Hale House on a Thursday evening in late July to find his wife hosting a small gathering in the south parlor. He could hear voices, female voices, laughing, as he entered through the main hall. Something that might have been relief flickered in his chest. She was socializing, engaging with people. Maybe she was getting better. He moved toward the parlor, intending to greet the guests, then stopped in the doorway. Eliza sat in the center of a group of women, Catherine Thornton, the Ashford matriarch. Two others he didn't immediately recognize. They were having tea, talking about something that had Catherine laughing hard enough to wipe her eyes. Eliza was smiling, actually smiling, not the empty mask she wore around him. Absolutely refused to leave, Catherine was saying. Stood there in the rain insisting he could fix the carriage wheel himself while the driver tried to explain. "That's Robert all over," one of the other women interrupted. "Remember when he—" They dissolved into laughter again. Eliza's smile widened. She looked alive, engaged, like the woman she'd been at the Thornton dinner party before Adrien had— Before he'd what? Destroyed her? Slowly murdered whatever spark she'd brought into their marriage? "Your Grace," Helen appeared at his elbow, making him flinch. "I didn't realize you'd returned. Should I inform Her Grace?" "No." The word came out harsher than intended. "Don't interrupt, I'll be in my study." He retreated before anyone could notice him standing there like an intruder in his own home. Back to his study. Back to his desk. Back to the work that made sense when nothing else did. But he couldn't focus. He kept seeing Eliza's face, the life in it, the genuine emotion, and knowing that none of that was for him. That whatever person she'd been before their marriage, whatever warmth and light she'd possessed, she'd locked it away where he couldn't reach it. No, where he'd trained her not to show it to him. The distinction mattered. He was staring at timber reports without seeing them when Marcus appeared again. "Bad news." Adrien almost laughed. "Of course. What now?" Carver filed a formal complaint with the territorial governor. Claims you assaulted him without cause during the commerce meeting. Wants you brought up on charges. That's absurd. There were witnesses who are mostly afraid of you, loyal to you, or both. Carver's making it a legal issue. Governor's office sent a formal inquiry. Marcus tossed a letter onto the desk. "You're being summoned to Millbrook next week for a hearing." Adrien read the letter twice. It was carefully worded, avoiding direct accusations while making clear that the territorial government was taking Carver's complaint seriously. If found guilty of assault against a fellow landowner, Adrien could face substantial fines, loss of trading privileges, or, worst case, temporary suspension of his mining and timber rights pending review. It was a nuisance, a political maneuver by a bitter old man with a grudge. But nuisances had to be dealt with, and this one could cost him weeks of attention he couldn't afford to spare. "When's the hearing?" "Next Thursday, Millbrook Courthouse." Marcus studied him. "You might want to bring your wife." "Why?" "Because half of Carver's complaint is about your erratic behavior and inability to maintain proper household management. If you show up with a poised, supportive wife, it undermines his narrative." "I'm not using Eliza as a prop." "No, you're using her as evidence that you're a stable, responsible landholder whose momentary loss of temper was an aberration, not a pattern." Marcus crossed his arms. "This is politics. You need every advantage. I'll handle it myself." "Your funeral." But after Marcus left, Adrien sat with the letter and thought about what it would look like. Him standing alone before the territorial governor while Carver painted him as an unstable tyrant who couldn't even manage his own marriage. The optics were terrible. And optics mattered in these situations, much as he hated to admit it. He found Eliza in the conservatory the next morning. She was repotting something, her hands deep in soil, hair tied back with a simple ribbon. She looked up when he entered, and her face did that thing it always did now, smoothed out, emptied itself, became a polite mask. "Adrien, I need to ask you something." He felt ridiculous even broaching this. "There's a hearing in Millbrook next week, a legal matter. It would help my case if you attended with me." "A hearing about what?" "Edmund Carver filed assault charges. From the commerce meeting." Understanding flickered in her eyes. "When you grabbed him, Yes. And you want me there because part of his complaint involves claims about my household management. About you. He forced the words out. About how I treat you. If you're there, it undermines his argument. She turned back to her plants. I see. You need me to play the role of dutiful wife to protect your business interests. Eliza sobbed. I'll do it. She didn't look at him. That's part of the contract, isn't it? Supporting you in public matters? I'll attend. Thank you. Will there be anything else? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to ask her to talk to him, really talk, the way she talked to Catherine and the other women. Wanted to beg her to show him even a fraction of the warmth he'd seen on her face the day before. No, that's all. He left her in the conservatory, surrounded by living things that responded to her care. The hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock on Thursday. Adrien and Eliza took the carriage together in silence, sitting on opposite sides like strangers forced to share transportation. She wore something appropriate, deep blue, elegant, but not ostentatious. Her hair was perfectly arranged. She looked every inch the Duchess. She also looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Thank you for coming, Adrien said as they approached Millbrook. You already thanked me. I know, He struggled for words. I know this isn't how you wanted to spend your day. I don't have any particular way I want to spend my days. She kept her eyes on the window. One's much like another lately. Before he could respond, they arrived at the courthouse. A crowd had gathered, larger than Adrien expected. Word of the hearing had spread. People wanted to see Duke Hale brought down a notch, or defended, or simply wanted entertainment on a slow summer afternoon. Edmund Carver stood near the courthouse steps with his lawyer and several supporters. He saw Adrien's carriage and smiled, the smile of a man who thought he'd already won. Remember, Adrien said quietly as Joseph opened the door. You don't have to say anything. Just sit beside me. That's enough. Eliza stepped out of the carriage with practiced grace. She took Adrien's offered arm, and together they walked toward the courthouse. Carver's smile faltered slightly as he took in Eliza's composed demeanor, but recovered quickly. Inside, the hearing room was packed. Territorial Governor Walsh presided, a pragmatic man in his 60s who'd built his career on careful neutrality. He nodded at Adrien and Eliza as they took their seats. Shall we begin? Walsh didn't wait for an answer. Mr. Carver, you've filed a complaint of assault against Duke Hale. Present your case. Carver's lawyer stood, a slick young man from the eastern cities who probably thought this backwater hearing was beneath him. Your Honor, my client was physically attacked during a lawful assembly without provocation. Duke Hale grabbed Mr. Carver by the collar and threw him to the ground in front of multiple witnesses. This violent outburst demonstrates a pattern of erratic behavior. Objection. Adrien's lawyer, Thomas Garrett, a local man who'd handled the Hale family's legal matters for 20 years, rose smoothly. There's no established pattern. This is the first incident of its kind. The first physical incident, perhaps? The young lawyer shot back. But there's substantial testimony regarding Duke Hale's emotional instability, particularly regarding his household management, which has nothing to do with the alleged assault. It has everything to do with it. A man who can't maintain basic emotional connections, who neglects his own wife to the point that she's... Stop! The word came from Eliza. The room went silent. All eyes turned to her. She stood slowly, hands clasped in front of her, face pale but determined. Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. May I speak? Walsh studied her. This is irregular, Duchess Hale. You're not a party to the complaint. No, but apparently I'm evidence in it. She looked directly at Carver's lawyer. You were about to make claims about my well-being, about how my husband treats me. I'd like to address those claims directly. Eliza, you don't have to... Adrien started. She ignored him. Your Honor? Walsh considered, then nodded. Very well, but keep it brief. Eliza turned to face the room. Adrien watched her, suddenly terrified of what she might say. She could destroy him right here. Tell the truth about their marriage, about his neglect, about how he'd slowly starved her of everything that mattered, and she'd be completely justified. My husband, Eliza began, is not an easy man to live with. He works obsessively. He struggles with emotional expression. Our marriage is not... She paused, choosing words carefully. It's not what I expected when I agreed to it. But neglect? Abuse? No. She looked at Carver, and there was steel in her voice when she continued. Mr. Carver is attempting to use me as a weapon against my husband. He's making assumptions about my life, my feelings, my circumstances, none of which he has any right to make. Yes, Adrien grabbed him during the commerce meeting. I've been told what Mr. Carver said, what he implied about me, and while I don't condone violence, her hands tightened. I understand why my husband reacted as he did. Mr. Carver deliberately provoked him by making public claims about private matters he knows nothing about. The public has a right to, Carver's lawyer began. The public has no rights regarding my marriage. Eliza's voice sharpened. None. And if this hearing is going to hinge on speculation about my well-being, then let me be clear, I am here by choice. I stand beside my husband by choice. Whatever difficulties we face are ours to resolve, not yours to exploit for political advantage. She sat down abruptly, trembling slightly. Adrien wanted to reach for her hand but didn't dare. The room buzzed with whispers. Walsh banged his gavel. Order. Mr. Garrett, do you have anything to add? Only that my client acknowledges his reaction was excessive. He's prepared to offer a formal apology and pay reasonable compensation for any distress caused. Mr. Carver. Carver looked like he'd been slapped. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, Carver stood. I want a formal apology, in writing, and $500 for my trouble. 300, Garrett countered. He'd come up. And the apology will note that Mr. Carver's comments were inappropriate and provocative. They haggled for another 10 minutes. Eventually, Walsh imposed a settlement. Adrien would provide a written apology acknowledging his loss of temper, pay Carver $400 in damages, and the matter would be considered closed. Both parties agreed to cease making public statements about each other's private affairs. It was over. Adrien had won, barely, and at a cost, but he'd won. Outside the courthouse, the crowd dispersed slowly. Adrien and Eliza walked to their carriage in silence. Joseph opened the door. Eliza climbed in. Adrien followed. They were halfway home before he found his voice. Thank you for what you said in there. I didn't do it for you. I know. I did it because I won't be used as a weapon by men who think my life is their business. She finally looked at him. But I also won't lie about what our marriage is. You heard me in there. I told them it's not what I expected, that you're not easy to live with. That was the truth. Yes. The rest was true too. You've never abused me. You've never deliberately hurt me. You've just... She trailed off, looking out the window. You've just never seen me. Adrien felt something crack in his chest. I'm seeing you now. Are you? She turned to face him fully. Because I stood up in that courtroom and defended you, and I don't even know why I did it. Part of me wanted to let you fall. Let Carver win. Let you lose everything you've built and see how it feels. But I couldn't. Not because I love you. I don't. Not anymore. I killed that to survive, but because... She swallowed hard. Because watching you lose would mean I'd wasted a year of my life on nothing, on no one. Eliza, stop. Her voice broke. Just stop. You keep trying to fix this with words, with attention, with whatever you think will work. But you don't understand. It's not fixable. I'm not fixable. I'm just done. The carriage rolled on. The silence was absolute. They reached Hale House as the sun was setting. Eliza went directly to her room without a word. Adrien stood in the entrance hall watching her disappear up the stairs and felt the full weight of what he'd lost crushing down on him. Marcus found him there an hour later, still standing in the same spot. Heard it went well, relatively speaking. Did it? Adrien's voice sounded hollow. She defended me, saved me from Carver's trap, and she told me she doesn't love me anymore. Which of those qualifies as well? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. You have to do something. Why? Adrien looked at him. What can I do that won't make it worse? She's right. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to be what she needs. I built an empire, Marcus. I can engineer solutions to problems that would break other men. But this? He gestured helplessly upward, toward where Eliza was locked behind another door in another room in another part of his vast, empty house. I don't even know where to start. Start by admitting you need help. From whom? I don't know. A priest? No priests. Adrien's voice hardened. This isn't about faith or forgiveness. This is about... He struggled for words. This is about being broken in a way I don't know how to fix. Then maybe, Marcus said quietly, you need to stop trying to fix it and start trying to understand it. He left Adrien alone in the entrance hall. Above, behind a locked door, Eliza sat on her bed with her face in her hands. She'd held herself together through the hearing, through the carriage ride, through the facade of composure she'd worn like armor. Now alone, she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd realized in that courtroom. She was trapped. Not by the contract, not by the estate, not even by Adrien's neglect. She was trapped by the fact that she'd married a man who'd never learned how to be human with another human being. And no amount of patience or hope or self-sacrifice was going to change that. The only choice left was whether to keep slowly dying or do something about it. August came in hot and stayed that way. The kind of heat that made the northern territories feel almost southern, that turned the estate grounds brown and dusty, that shortened tempers and lengthened shadows. Eliza stopped attending social gatherings, stopped hosting tea, stopped pretending she was fine when Catherine or anyone else asked. She spent her days in the conservatory or the library, reading books she didn't remember afterward, staring at walls that pressed closer every day. Adrien threw himself into work with renewed desperation. He expanded operations at the southern mines. He negotiated new contracts with manufacturers in Pittsburgh and Boston. He redesigned the entire logging operations workflow to increase efficiency by another 12%. None of it helped. They existed in the same house like two planets in adjacent orbits, never quite touching, bound by gravity, but separated by vast, cold space. It was Helen who finally broke. She found Adrien in his study on a sweltering afternoon in mid-August, wringing her hands, clearly terrified but determined. Your Grace, I need to tell you something. Adrien looked up from his contracts, irritated at the interruption. What is it? It's about Her Grace. She's not... Sir, she's not eating. What? The meals I bring her room, she barely touches them. I've been tracking it for 2 weeks now. She's having maybe a few bites of bread, some tea. That's it. Helen's voice shook. She's wasting away, sir, and I know it's not my place, but if someone doesn't do something... Adrien was already on his feet. Where is she? The conservatory. But, sir, she won't... He didn't wait to hear the rest. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart hammering in his chest. The conservatory door stood open. Eliza was there, sitting on her usual bench, wearing a simple white dress that hung loose on her frame. Helen was right. She'd lost weight, not just a little, but enough that her collarbones stood out sharply. Her wrists looked fragile as bird bones. Her face had taken on a hollow, haunted quality. Eliza. She didn't look up. Adrien? Helen says you're not eating. Helen needs to mind her own business. This is my business. He moved closer, trying to keep his voice calm, even as panic clawed at his throat. You're not well. I'm fine. You're not fine. Look at yourself. I don't want to look at myself. She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there stopped him cold. Not anger, not even pain, just emptiness. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be anywhere. I'm just so tired, Adrien. Tired of pretending. Tired of existing. Tired of being the ghost in your fortress. Then leave. The words were out before he'd thought them through. They hung in the air between them like thrown daggers. Eliza blinked. What? Leave. He heard himself saying it, couldn't stop himself. You're miserable here. You're dying here. So leave. Go back to your family. Go to Catherine. Go anywhere. I'll arrange the separation. We'll work out the contracts. Just go somewhere you can live. You're dismissing me? No, I'm releasing you. From a marriage that's killing you. From obligations you never should have had. From me. His voice cracked. I can't fix this. I've tried and I can't, but I can give you back your freedom. She stared at him for a long moment, then
Slowly, she stood. "You're right," she said quietly. "You can't fix this." Because it was never about fixing. It was about caring enough to try in the first place. But you didn't. And now it's too late. "Eliza, I'll leave." She brushed past him toward the door. "Tomorrow morning. I'll pack tonight." "Wait, that's not—" "I didn't mean immediately," but she was already gone. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, then up the stairs. A door slammed somewhere in the distance.
Adrien stood alone in the conservatory, surrounded by the plants his wife had lovingly cultivated, and realized what he'd done. He'd given her an out, and she'd taken it. The empire he'd built, the fortress he'd constructed, the walls he'd maintained so carefully, none of it mattered. Because the one thing he'd never thought to protect, the one thing he'd never valued until it was gone, was walking out of his life tomorrow morning. And he had no one to blame but himself. The thought lodged in Adrien's chest like a splinter working its way toward his heart. He stood in the conservatory until the light failed, until the plants around him became dark shapes against darker walls, until he could no longer avoid the truth. He just handed his wife permission to leave, and she'd accepted it without hesitation, because that's what you did when someone asked if you wanted freedom from suffering. You took it. You ran. You didn't look back. He found Marcus in the estate office, reviewing shipment logs by lamplight. "She's leaving tomorrow." Marcus set down his pen slowly. "Leaving where?" "Leaving. Me. The estate. Everything." Adrien slumped into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I told her she could go, and she said yes." "You told her?" Marcus stared at him. "Are you out of your mind?" "Probably. Yes. I don't know." Adrien rubbed his face. "She was wasting away. Helen said she's not eating. I looked at her, Marcus really looked at her, and she's—" His voice broke. "She's dying here, so I gave her an out." "Without thinking about what happens after?" "There is no after. That's the point." Adrien laughed, and it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I built all this. The timber operations, the mines, the entire estate. I thought control was the answer. Keep everything organized, keep everything functioning, and life would work. But you can't control a person. You can't systematize love. And now the one thing I never learned how to hold on to is walking out the door." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then, "So go after her." "She doesn't want me to." "How do you know?" "Because she said yes, Marcus. I offered her freedom, and she took it. That's not exactly ambiguous." "No, you idiot." Marcus leaned forward. "She said yes because you finally gave her the choice you should have given her a year ago. The choice to matter. To be seen as something more than a function in your household machine. But that doesn't mean she wants to go. It means she's tired of begging to be kept." Adrien looked up sharply. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Stop asking me. Start asking yourself what you actually want. And once you figure that out, which shouldn't take long, since it's obvious to everyone in this entire territory except you, then you fight for it. You don't let her walk away because it's easier than learning how to be human." "I don't know how to be what she needs." "Then learn." Marcus stood. "You've learned everything else. Engineering, business, politics. All of it was hard, and you figured it out because you wanted to badly enough. So the question isn't whether you can learn, it's whether you want her badly enough to try." He left Adrien sitting in the dim office, surrounded by the ledgers and contracts and systematic records of an empire that suddenly meant nothing. Upstairs, Eliza packed with mechanical efficiency. Dresses, shoes, books, the accumulated possessions of a year spent trying to build a life in a place that had no room for her. She folded everything neatly, placed it carefully in trunks, and felt absolutely nothing. That was the worst part. Not the anger or the grief or even the relief. Just this vast, empty numbness where feelings used to live. Helen knocked hesitantly. "Your Grace? Is there anything I can help with?" "No, thank you." "Please don't go." Helen's voice cracked. "I know it's not my place, but you've been so good to us, to all the staff. And His Grace, he's trying." Too late. Eliza didn't look up from her packing. "Some things can't be fixed with effort. They needed to be protected in the first place."
Helen left quietly. Eliza continued packing. Outside, the August heat pressed against the windows like a living thing. She worked through the night.
Not because there was that much to pack. She'd arrived with 2 trunks and was leaving with 3, but because sleep felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrien's face in the conservatory. The panic, the desperate offer, the realization, far too late, that he'd broken something irreparable. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction at that, wanted to revel in his pain the way she'd suffered through hers. But she was too tired for revenge, too empty for vindication. She just wanted to leave. Dawn came cold for August, the first hint that summer was dying. Eliza finished packing as the sky turned gray. She dressed in traveling clothes, practical, simple, the kind of thing you wore when you were running toward nothing in particular and away from everything that hurt. The trunks were by the door when Adrien found her. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept either. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Don't go." Eliza closed the final trunk. "You told me I could. I was wrong." "No, you were right. I'm dying here. You saw it yourself." "Then I'll change." He moved closer, and she noticed his hands were shaking. "I'll be different. I'll make time. Stop." She held up a hand. "I've heard this before. Different words, same promise. You'll try harder. You'll pay attention. You'll suddenly become someone capable of caring about another person. But you won't. Not really, because you don't know how, and I can't teach you. What if I learned?" "Learned what?" "How to love. You can't learn that from a manual, Adrien. It's not a system you can optimize or a process you can engineer. It's—" She stopped, struggling for words. "It's just something you either have or you don't, and you don't." "That's not true." "Isn't it? Name one time in the past year when you put me before your work. One time when you chose connection over control. One time when you looked at me and saw a person instead of a function." Silence. "That's what I thought." Eliza lifted one of her trunks. "Joseph is bringing the carriage around. I'm going to Catherine's initially. After that, I don't know. My father will help arrange the legal separation. You'll be free to find a wife who's actually suited for this life." "I don't want another wife." "Then I suppose you'll have to learn to live alone." She headed for the door. "You're good at that." Adrien stepped in front of her, blocking the exit. Not threateningly, just desperately. "Please, just give me one more chance. I've given you a year of chances, a year of trying, a year of hoping, and do you know what I learned?" She met his eyes directly. "I learned that you can't make someone see you if they're determined to look away. I learned that love isn't a contract you can negotiate. And I learned that I deserve better than spending my life begging for scraps of attention from a man who treats me like livestock. He feeds because the contract requires it." "That's not... I never..." "Yes, you did." Her voice softened, which somehow made it worse. "You were never cruel, Adrien. You were never deliberately hurtful. You were just absent. And I can't live with absence anymore. It's too close to death." She pushed past him gently. He let her go this time, standing frozen as she carried her trunk down the hallway toward the main stairs. Below, the staff had gathered in the entrance hall. Helen was crying. Joseph stood by the door looking grim. Marcus waited by the stairs, his face unreadable. "Your Grace," Marcus said as Eliza descended, "are you certain about this?" "Very. Because there are ways to—" "I appreciate your concern, Marcus. But my mind is made up." She reached the bottom of the stairs and handed him a folded letter. "Would you give this to Adrien? After I've gone." "What is it?" "An explanation, or an apology. I'm not sure anymore." She looked around at the assembled staff, the people she'd worked with, planned with, laughed with, during the brief moments when the house had felt like more than a mausoleum. "Thank you all. For everything. You've been kinder to me than you had to be." Joseph moved to help with the trunks. Adrien appeared at the top of the stairs, watching. For a moment their eyes met. Eliza saw something there, pain maybe, or regret, or just the frustrated confusion of a man who'd never learned the language everyone else spoke fluently. Then Joseph opened the door, and morning light flooded the entrance hall. The carriage waited outside, horses stamping impatiently in the cool air. The world beyond Blackridge Vale beckoned, uncertain, terrifying, but also blessedly free. Eliza walked toward it without looking back. The door closed behind her. The carriage rolled forward. Inside Hale House, Adrien stood at the top of the stairs and watched through the window as his wife disappeared around the bend in the drive. Marcus approached quietly, offering the letter. "She said to give you this." Adrien took it with numb fingers. The envelope was addressed in Eliza's neat handwriting. For Adrien, when he's ready to understand. He wasn't ready. He'd never be ready. But he broke the seal anyway and read. "Adrien, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I want you to understand why, even though I'm not sure it will matter. When I married you, I knew what I was agreeing to. A practical arrangement, mutual benefit, no romance. You were very clear about that. My father laughed and said it was more honesty than most marriages started with. I remember nodding, thinking I understood what you meant. I didn't. I thought no romance meant no grand gestures or passionate declarations. I thought it meant we'd build partnership instead of poetry. I thought I could live with that. What I didn't realize was that you meant no connection at all. No intimacy beyond the physical requirements of producing heirs. No friendship. No recognition that I was a person with thoughts and feelings that might occasionally be worth your attention. I tried to adapt. I ran your household efficiently. I never complained about your long hours or your absences. I gave you space and time and silence. I thought if I was useful enough, valuable enough, you might eventually see me as more than a function. But you never did. And somewhere around month 6, I realized you never would. Because you don't see anyone that way. Not me, not the staff, not even Marcus, and he's the closest thing you have to a friend. You see systems, problems to solve, resources to optimize. I'm not a system, Adrien. I'm a person. And persons need to be seen. So I'm leaving. Not to punish you. You've done nothing that violates our contract, but to save myself. Because staying means accepting that I don't matter, that my presence is interchangeable with any other competent household manager, that love is something other people have, but I'm not entitled to want. I can't accept that anymore. Maybe someday you'll understand what you lost. Maybe you won't. Either way, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for in all that control and efficiency and emotional distance. I hope it keeps you warm on cold nights. I hope it makes you feel less alone. I hope it's worth it. Eliza. Adrien read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his pocket, and walked down the stairs with movements that felt mechanical, disconnected from his body. Marcus watched him warily. "What do you need?" "A horse, traveling supplies, whatever cash is in the safe." "You're going after her?" "No." Adrien kept walking, heading for his study. "I'm going to do what I should have done a year ago." "Which is?" "Learn how to be human." He spent the next hour in a frenzy of activity. He pulled maps, identified routes, drafted letters. The staff watched in confused silence as Duke Adrien Hale, the most controlled, systematic man in the Northern Territories, tore through his study like a man possessed. Finally, Marcus couldn't take it anymore. "Adrien, what are you doing?" "She's going to Catherine's. That's 4 hours by carriage. If I ride hard, I can reach the Thornton estate by afternoon." "And then what?" "You arrive sweaty and desperate and I tell her the truth." Adrien stopped, breathing hard. "I tell her that she's right, that I don't know how to love, that I've spent my entire adult life building walls because my father died from caring too much, and I swore I'd never be that vulnerable. I tell her that I'm terrified of needing anyone because everyone I've ever needed has left, one way or another. And I tell her," his voice cracked, "I tell her that I'd rather be terrified and vulnerable and completely out of my depth with her than safe and controlled and alone without her." "That's good. That's actually human." Marcus blinked. "Did you rehearse that?" 5 times while packing. "Then go, before you lose your nerve." Adrien grabbed his travel bag and headed for the door, then stopped, turned back. "Marcus." "Yeah?" "If this doesn't work, if she won't take me back, I'm not coming home for a while, maybe a long while. You'll need to manage the operations. Can you do that?" "Of course." "Good. Because for the first time in my life, I'm choosing something that has nothing to do with timber yields or mining efficiency or empire building. He felt something shift in his chest as he said it. I'm choosing her, even if she doesn't choose me back. He left before Marcus could respond. The stable hands had his horse ready, a strong gelding bred for distance riding. Adrien mounted quickly and spurred toward the main road without looking back at Hale House. The ride was brutal. August heat beat down as morning turned to noon, then afternoon. Adrien pushed the horse hard, but not cruelly, stopping twice to water and rest. His mind raced ahead to the Thornton estate, to what he'd say, to all the ways this could go wrong. She'd probably refuse to see him. She had every right to. Or she'd see him and tell him exactly what she'd written in the letter, that it was too late, that some things couldn't be fixed, that she'd already made peace with leaving. But he had to try. That was the thing he'd finally understood, reading her words. Trying wasn't weak, failing wasn't fatal. What destroyed you was building walls so high that nothing could get through. Not pain, but also not love. Not risk, but also not reward. His father had died because he cared, but he'd also lived, really lived, in ways Adrien never had. Maybe it was time to start. The Thornton estate came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Adrien's horse was lathered, his own shirt soaked with sweat. He probably looked half wild. He didn't care. Joseph was in the stable yard, unhitching Eliza's carriage. He looked up as Adrien rode in, and his expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been approval. Your Grace. Is she here? Inside, with Mrs. Thornton. There. But Adrien was already dismounting, already striding toward the main house. A servant opened the door, startled, then scrambled to announce him, but Adrien walked past without waiting for protocol. He found them in the sitting room. Catherine looked up first, eyes widening. Then Eliza turned, teacup frozen halfway to her lips. She looked exhausted and surprised, and was that hope? It flickered so briefly he might have imagined it. Adrien. I'm sorry. The words tumbled out before he'd planned them. Not for letting you go. That was the first honest thing I've done in a year. I'm sorry for making it necessary, for building a life so cold that you had to escape it to survive, for treating you like a function instead of a person, for being so terrified of needing anyone that I convinced myself I didn't need you. Catherine stood. I think I'll just stay. Eliza's eyes never left Adrien's face. If he's going to do this, he can do it in front of witnesses. Adrien swallowed hard. Fair enough. He took a step closer. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't know how to love someone without breaking them. My father loved deeply, and it killed him, so I swore I'd never be that weak, that vulnerable, that dependent on another person's continued existence. That's not love, Eliza said quietly. That's fear. Yes, it is. And I've been ruled by it for 20 years. He moved closer still until he was standing right in front of her. But reading your letter, understanding that I'd hurt you worse by pushing you away than my father was ever hurt by caring, I realized something. I'm not protecting myself by staying closed off. I'm just already dead, already gone, a ghost running an empire. Adrien, let me finish, please. He was shaking now, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. I love you. I don't know when it happened. Maybe at the Thornton dinner party when I watched another man make you smile and wanted to break things. Maybe when you defended me at the hearing even though I didn't deserve it. Maybe the first time you played piano and I realized I'd married a stranger because I'd never bothered to ask who you were. He took her hands. She didn't pull away. I love you, he repeated, and I'm probably going to be terrible at showing it. I'll probably work too much and forget to talk about feelings and struggle with intimacy because I've spent my entire adult life avoiding it. But I want to learn. With you. From you. Because a life where I'm safe but alone isn't a life worth living. Silence. Eliza stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she started crying. Not quiet, dignified tears. Actual sobs that shook her whole body. Adrien panicked, unsure if this was good or catastrophic, until she threw her arms around him and held on like she was drowning. You idiot, she gasped against his chest. You absolute idiot. I know. You couldn't have figured this out 6 months ago? I'm slow. You're brilliant at everything except human emotion. Yes. She pulled back enough to look at him. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy, her careful composure completely destroyed. She'd never looked more beautiful. I can't just forgive you, she said. You hurt me. Badly. For a long time. You made me feel invisible. I know. And I can't go back to how things were. I won't be your household manager who occasionally shares your bed. If we do this, if we actually try, it has to be real. Partnership, communication, all of it. Yes. I'm going to be difficult. I'm going to demand your attention. I'm going to get angry when you prioritize work over us. I'm going to be human. Adrien cupped her face gently. You're going to be human, and I'm going to try to be human back. And we're both probably going to fail regularly because we're flawed and scared and carrying damage. But we'll fail together instead of separately. She laughed through tears. That's the worst romantic speech I've ever heard. I warned you I'd be terrible at this. You really are. Can you live with that? Eliza looked at him for a long moment. Adrien felt his entire future balanced on whatever came next. Not his empire, not his operations, just this. The terrifying, exhilarating possibility that someone might choose to stay even after seeing exactly how broken he was. I can live with it, she said finally, on one condition. Anything. We go home together, not to your fortress, to our home. And you let me in, really in. No locked doors, no separate existences. We either do this fully or not at all. Fully. He said it without hesitation, terrifyingly fully. She kissed him then. It was awkward and salty with tears and probably objectively terrible as first real kisses went. But it felt like coming alive after a year of slow death, like breaking through ice into air, like choosing risk over safety and finding that the risk was exactly what he'd needed all along. Catherine cleared her throat loudly from across the room. Well, I suppose you won't be needing that guest room after all, Eliza. They broke apart. Eliza laughed. Actually laughed, the sound so bright and genuine that Adrien felt something he'd walled off for 2 decades crack open in his chest. I suppose not. Good, because Robert will be insufferable if he finds out I'm housing runaway duchesses. Catherine smiled. Go home, both of you. Work this out, and invite me to dinner once you've figured out how to be in the same room without crying or running away. They left as the sun was setting, riding together on Adrien's horse because the carriage would have taken too long and neither of them could bear the thought of more distance. Eliza sat in front of him, his arms around her waist, her body warm against his chest. This doesn't fix everything, she said as they rode through the cooling evening. You know that, right? Yes. We still have to actually learn how to live together, how to talk to each other, how to build something real. I know. And you'll probably revert to old habits sometimes. Work too much. Forget to be present. Probably. And I'll get frustrated and angry and Eliza. He pulled her closer. I'm not expecting perfect. I'm expecting difficult, messy, real. And I'm ready for it. All of it. She leaned back against him. Good. Because I'm a lot of work. So am I. Yes. You really are. They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Eliza spoke again, quieter now. What changed? Really? Adrien thought about it. I realized control was just another word for cowardice. I'd spent 20 years building walls and calling it strength. But real strength, the kind that matters, is letting someone in even when it terrifies you. My father knew that. And he had 10 years of genuine love before he lost it, which is 10 years more than I was getting with all my careful distance. He died, though. Yes, but he lived first. That's the part I missed. Eliza was quiet for a moment, then, I'm still angry with you. Good, you should be. And I'm going to make you work for this. I'm counting on it. And if you ever make me feel invisible again, I won't. He meant it with every fiber of his being. I promise. I'll fail at a lot of things.
I'll stumble and make mistakes and probably need you to explain basic emotional concepts to me like I'm a particularly slow child, but I will never stop seeing you. Not again." She twisted to look at him. Even in the fading light, he could see she was smiling. "Okay. Okay? Okay." She kissed him softly. "Let's go home. Our home. And figure this out together." They rode on through the darkening landscape. Behind them, summer was dying. Ahead, Blackridge Vale waited, harsh, unforgiving, beautiful in its own stark way. The same land that had witnessed their separate suffering would now witness their attempt to heal together. It wouldn't be easy. Adrien knew that. He'd spent a year breaking what they were trying to build, and repair was always harder than destruction. There would be setbacks, fights, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves and they had to actively choose vulnerability over safety. But as they crested the ridge that overlooked the Hale estate, his empire, his fortress, the thing he'd built to keep the world at bay, Adrien felt something shift. Not the empire. That was just timber and iron and contracts. The shift was internal. A wall coming down, a door opening, the terrifying, exhilarating recognition that he'd finally chosen right. He'd chosen her. He'd chosen risk. He'd chosen life over the slow death of perfect control. And for the first time in 20 years, Duke Adrien Hale felt like he might actually know what it meant to be alive. And for the first time in 20 years, Duke Adrien Hale felt like he might actually know what it meant to be alive. They reached Hale House after dark. The staff had clearly been watching for their return. Lights blazed in every window, and Marcus stood on the front steps with an expression that managed to combine relief, approval, and exasperation in equal measure. "Welcome back, Your Grace." He nodded to Eliza, then to Adrien. "Both of you." "Thank you, Marcus." Eliza slid down from the horse, accepting his steadying hand. "I'm sorry for the drama." "Drama keeps life interesting." He turned to Adrien. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell, but it's an improvement." Adrien dismounted, his legs unsteady after hours of riding. "Is everything—" "The operations are fine. The world didn't end while you had your crisis. Now get inside before the staff think you've both lost your minds entirely." They walked into the entrance hall together. The household staff had assembled, not formally, but hovering nearby with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Helen stepped forward first, her eyes red. "Your Grace, I'm so glad you came back." Eliza hugged her, which clearly surprised the maid. "Thank you for caring enough to tell someone I was in trouble. That took courage. I couldn't watch you disappear." "Neither could I." Eliza glanced at Adrien. "Turns out I wasn't the only one." Over the next hour, they navigated the awkward re-entry into normal life. Eliza's trunks were retrieved from the carriage and unpacked. Adrien washed off the road dust and changed into clean clothes. They found each other again in the conservatory, drawn to neutral ground where neither of them had established too much territory. "So," Eliza said, sitting on her usual bench. "Now what?" Adrien sat beside her, close but not touching, testing boundaries. "Now we figure out how to actually be married." "That's not very specific." "No, it's not." He turned to face her. "I don't have a plan, Eliza. For the first time in my life, I don't have a system or a strategy or a clear path forward. I just know that I want this, us, whatever that means. It means you can't work 16-hour days anymore." "Agreed." "And we eat dinner together. Actually together, not you signing papers while I sit across from you." "Yes." "And you have to talk to me. Real conversations, not logistics or household business. I need to know what you're thinking, what you're feeling, even when it's uncomfortable." Adrien felt the old instinct rising, the urge to deflect, to retreat behind walls, to keep the vulnerable parts of himself locked away where they couldn't be hurt. He pushed through it. "I'm terrified," he said. "Right now, sitting here, I'm absolutely terrified that I'm going to fail you again, that I'll revert to old habits and you'll realize I'm not capable of changing, that you'll wake up in 6 months and regret coming back." Eliza's expression softened. "That's a start." "A start at what?" "Being honest." She took his hand. "I'm terrified too, that I'm setting myself up to be hurt again,
that I'm naive for believing you can change, that I'll spend another year trying to reach you and hitting walls. She squeezed his fingers. But here's the difference between now and before. We're both saying it out loud. We're acknowledging the fear instead of pretending it doesn't exist. So what do we do with it? We live with it. We work through it. And when we fail, because we will fail, Adrien, we're human, we try again. She leaned against his shoulder. That's what partnership means. Not perfection, just persistent effort. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the plants Eliza had cultivated during her loneliest months. Adrien thought about all the time he'd wasted, all the moments he could have been here with her, learning who she was, building something real instead of maintaining polite distance. I want to know everything, he said finally. Everything I missed, what you read, what you think about, why you play piano when you're nervous, all of it. That's going to take a while. Good. We have time. She laughed softly. Do we? You're Duke of Blackridge Vale. You have an empire to run. The empire can wait. He meant it. Or rather, the empire can operate on reasonable hours instead of consuming my entire existence. Marcus has been telling me for years that I delegate poorly. Time to prove him right. He'll be insufferable about it. Probably. I can live with that. They stayed in the conservatory until late, talking, really talking, for the first time since before their wedding. Eliza told him about the book she'd been reading, the garden plans she'd been developing, the small frustrations and occasional joys of managing a household full of people who'd been loyal to Adrien long before she arrived. Adrien told her about the equipment failures, the sabotage, the constant pressure of maintaining operations in an environment that punished mistakes brutally. It felt strange, uncomfortable, like learning a new language at 32 years old, but it also felt necessary, essential, the foundation of whatever they were trying to build. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with both of them. They climbed the stairs together, pausing outside Eliza's room. Do you want... Adrien started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. What? I don't know what the protocol is here. Do we go back to separate rooms? Do we... He felt his face heat. I don't want to assume anything. Eliza studied him for a moment, then she opened her door. Stay. Not like before. Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight. Relief flooded through him. Neither do I. They lay together in the dark, not sleeping at first, just existing in the same space without walls between them. Adrien held her carefully, afraid of pushing too far, too fast. Eliza curled against him like she was testing whether this was real or another dream that would dissolve in the morning light. Adrien? Thank you for coming after me. Thank you for letting me catch you. She was quiet for a moment, then, I'm still angry, about the year we lost, about how much I had to hurt before you noticed. You should be. I am too. Good, because I need you to remember this. When things get comfortable again, when the fear fades and old patterns try to reassert themselves, I need you to remember how close we came to losing each other. I will. He tightened his arms around her. Every day. I promise. She believed him. Or she chose to believe him, which in the end amounted to the same thing. They fell asleep tangled together, breathing in sync, two people who'd been drowning separately, finally learning to swim. The next weeks were harder than Adrien expected. Not because Eliza was difficult, though she was, deliberately so, pushing him to stay present even when work called, but because changing a lifetime of habits turned out to be exhausting work. He caught himself retreating to his study multiple times a day, caught himself prioritizing contracts over conversations, caught himself falling into the old pattern of treating efficiency as the highest virtue and human connection as an optional luxury. Each time, Eliza called him on it. Where are you going? I need to review You've been reviewing paperwork for 3 hours. You said you'd stop at 5. This is important. So am I. She'd stand in the doorway, arms crossed, refusing to budge. So are we. You promised. And he'd close the files and come back to dinner, to conversation, to the uncomfortable work of being present with another person. It chafed like new boots. But he kept at it. Marcus noticed the change and made it his personal mission to be as smug as possible about it. You're leaving at 6? That's early for you. I eat dinner with my wife now. How novel, almost like you're married to her. Do you have an actual point, or are you just enjoying yourself? Oh, I'm definitely enjoying myself. Marcus grinned. It's good to see you acting human for a change. The staff have started a betting pool on how long it lasts. That's insubordinate. That's honest. We're all rooting for you, but nobody's getting their hopes up. He clapped Adrien on the shoulder. Prove us wrong. The real test came 3 weeks after Eliza's return, when equipment failures at the northern timber camp threatened to shut down operations entirely. The old Adrien would have ridden out immediately and stayed until the problem was solved, sleeping in the field office for however many days it took. The new Adrien, or the Adrien trying to be new, hesitated. He found Eliza in the library that evening, reading by lamplight. I need to go to the northern camp tomorrow, equipment crisis. Could be 3 or 4 days before it's resolved. She looked up. Do you have to go personally? Marcus can't handle the technical repairs. I designed the systems. I'm the only one who can... He stopped himself. That's not entirely true. I could walk the senior engineer through it remotely. It would take longer, but it's possible. Then do that. It's inefficient. So? She set down her book. Adrien, you're going to face this choice constantly. The efficient solution versus the one that preserves what we're building. Sometimes efficiency has to lose. He wanted to argue, wanted to explain that the timber operations couldn't afford delays, that every day of shutdown cost money they couldn't recover. But he looked at her face, open, hopeful, still slightly guarded because she was waiting to see if he'd choose work over her again, and realized she was right. I'll send detailed instructions to the camp, and I'll ride up Wednesday morning, spend the day, come back Wednesday night. Even if it's not fully resolved? Even then. He sat beside her. The camp won't collapse in one night, and I made a promise to you. That's worth more than optimal efficiency. She kissed him. You're learning. Slowly. Most worthwhile things are learned slowly. He spent the evening drafting instructions instead of riding north immediately. It felt wrong, inefficient, wasteful, a poor use of resources. But the next morning, when he woke up with Eliza beside him, instead of alone in a field office, the wrongness faded. Maybe efficiency wasn't always the highest virtue. Maybe sometimes the slow way was the right way. The thought would have horrified him a year ago. Now it just felt true. Blum. September arrived with the first real cold snap, the kind of weather that reminded everyone in Blackridge Vale that summer was a brief visitor and winter the true landlord. Adrien found himself noticing the changing season in ways he never had before, not just as it affected operations schedules, but as something beautiful. The way morning frost turned the grounds silver. The particular quality of autumn light through the conservatory glass. The smell of wood smoke from the staff quarters. He mentioned this to Eliza over breakfast one morning, feeling ridiculous. I never paid attention to this before. The seasonal changes. I tracked them for operations purposes, but I never actually noticed them. And now you do? Yes. Because you notice them. You stand at the window watching the frost patterns. You comment on how the light changes. And I've started seeing it through your eyes. She smiled over her tea. That's what connection does. It lets you borrow someone else's perspective. See the world bigger than just your own narrow view. I'm not sure my view is particularly narrow. I run 600 square miles of territory. Geographically broad, emotionally narrow. She reached across the table to take his hand. There's a difference. They were interrupted by Marcus, who entered without knocking, a privilege only he had. We've got visitors, the Thorntons and about half the northern families. They're requesting an audience. Adrien frowned. Did we schedule something? No, Catherine says it's urgent. Something about a territorial matter that affects everyone. Adrien and Eliza exchanged glances. Territorial matters usually meant politics, and politics usually meant problems. They found the assembled group in the main parlor, Catherine and Robert Thornton, the Ashfords, the Mercers, and several other prominent families from the region. Edmund Carver was also there. He stood apart from the others, looking uncomfortable. What's this about? Adrien asked, keeping his voice neutral. Robert stepped forward. We've received word from the territorial governor. There's a proposal in front of the council to restructure land rights in the Northern Territories. Essentially, they want to renegotiate all existing mining and timber contracts to increase revenue for the central government. Renegotiate how? 70-30 split instead of 50-50, plus new environmental restrictions that would shut down about half the current operations. Robert's expression was grim. It would destroy most of the northern economy. Adrien processed this quickly. That's political suicide for Walsh. Why would he support it? He doesn't, but he's being pressured by the eastern factions who think we're getting too powerful up here. Catherine spoke up. They want to curtail northern independence before we start making demands of our own. So this is about control. Everything's about control, Carver spoke for the first time. Look, Hale, I know we've had our differences. That's putting it mildly. But this affects all of us. If this goes through, we're all finished. Our operations, our livelihoods, everything. He shifted uncomfortably. We need to present a unified front, push back as a coalition, and that means we need you. Why me? Because you're the largest operator in the territory. You have the most to lose, which means you have the most credibility. If Duke Hale opposes this, people listen. Carver's jaw tightened. I'm asking for your help, even though I don't deserve it after the accusations I made. Adrien looked at the assembled families. They were all watching him, waiting. This was the kind of crisis he'd built his reputation handling. Political maneuvering, territorial disputes, the chess game of influence and power. The old Adrien would have already been planning strategy. The new Adrien glanced at Eliza first. She nodded slightly. Permission. Or maybe just acknowledgement that this was important. What are you proposing? He asked. A joint delegation to the territorial capital, Robert said. All the major northern families presenting a united opposition. We need to argue that the current contract terms are already fair, that the restrictions would cause economic devastation, and that the central government has no grounds to unilaterally alter agreements that have been in place for decades. That's a legal argument. We'd need lawyers. Already arranged, but we need someone to lead the delegation. Someone who can speak for all of us and won't back down under pressure. That's not typically my strength. I'm better at systems than speeches. You're better than you think, Catherine spoke up. I've seen you defend your operations at commerce meetings. You're clear, logical, and you don't let people intimidate you. That's what we need. Adrien looked around the room again, at the faces of people who'd been his competitors, his critics, occasionally his enemies, all of them united by the threat to their shared home. I'll do it, he said, on one condition. Name it. Carver apologizes, publicly, for the accusations he made about my household management and my wife. He didn't look at the older man. If we're going to present a united front, we need to actually be united. That means clearing the air. Silence. Carver's face reddened. Then, slowly, he turned to face Eliza. Duchess Hale, I spoke out of turn at the commerce meeting, made assumptions about your situation that I had no right to make, used you as a weapon in a petty dispute with your husband. He cleared his throat. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Eliza studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted. Thank you. And Adrien, Duke Hale, I'm sorry for provoking you. You had reason to be angry. Yes, I did. Adrien kept his voice level. But I shouldn't have grabbed you. That was excessive, so I apologize for that as well. Carver nodded stiffly. The tension in the room eased slightly. Good, Robert said. Now that we've all made nice, let's discuss strategy. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Adrien found himself falling naturally into leadership, not because he sought it, but because he could see the shape of the problem clearly and knew how to articulate solutions. They'd need documentation proving the economic impact, testimonials from workers whose jobs would be affected, legal precedents showing that unilateral contract alterations violated territorial charter provisions. It was the kind of complex, multi-layered challenge Adrien excelled at. But this time, he noticed when the meeting had gone long enough. Noticed when people were getting tired and needed breaks. Noticed the human element in ways he never had before. At one point, Eliza brought in refreshments. She caught his eye as she set down the tea service, and something passed between them. Pride, maybe. or just acknowledgement that he was managing to balance two things at once: the work and the awareness of people around him. By the time the gathering dispersed, they had a plan. The delegation would travel to the territorial capital in 2 weeks. Adrien would serve as lead negotiator, with Robert and several others providing support. They'd present their case to the governor's council and, if necessary, take the matter to the full territorial assembly. It was risky. If they failed, the economic consequences would be severe, but doing nothing guaranteed failure. After everyone left, Adrien found Eliza back in the conservatory. She was tending to one of her plants, repotting something that had outgrown its container. "That was impressive," she said without looking up. "What was?" "The way you handled that. Not just the strategic planning. I expected that. But the way you navigated the personal dynamics." Carver's apology? The balance between asserting leadership and making space for others. "You've gotten better at the human parts." "I had a good teacher." He sat beside her. "Are you worried? About the delegation?" "A little. If this doesn't work..." "It'll work. It has to." He took her hand, still dirty from repotting soil. "But even if it doesn't, we'll figure something out. The operations matter, but they're not the only thing that matters anymore." She looked at him. "Who are you? And what have you done with my husband?" "He's still here, just learning to see beyond timber yields and mining quotas." "I like this version better." "So do I." And he meant it. 6 months ago, a crisis like this would have consumed him entirely. He'd have disappeared into planning and strategy and 15-hour workdays. Now, even knowing the stakes were enormous, he could still be present for dinner, could still ask Eliza about her day, could still remember that life existed beyond the problems he needed to solve. The delegation departed for the territorial capital on a cold morning in late September. Adrien, Robert, Carver, and 4 others rode in 2 carriages, surrounded by trunks full of documentation and legal briefs. Eliza stood on the steps of Hale House to see them off. "Be brilliant," she said, kissing Adrien quickly. "And be safe. I'll be back in 5 days, 6 at most." "I'm holding you to that." He kissed her again, longer this time, not caring that the others were watching. Then he climbed into the carriage and they rolled away toward whatever awaited them in the capital. The territorial capital of Millbrook had grown significantly since Adrien's last visit. New construction spread across the valley, evidence of the Northern Territory's increasing prosperity. That prosperity was exactly what made the Eastern factions nervous and what made this negotiation so critical. Governor Walsh received them in his formal chambers, a calculated show of respect that meant he was taking the matter seriously. He was flanked by 2 council members and a lawyer from the Eastern Territories, a sharp-eyed woman who'd clearly been brought in specifically to counter Adrien's arguments. "Gentlemen," Walsh began, "I appreciate you coming, though I should tell you up front that the pressure for these reforms is substantial. The Eastern Territories feel the current arrangement gives you disproportionate benefits. With respect, Governor, the Eastern Territories don't operate in the same environment we do." Adrien kept his voice level as he opened his first folder. "These documents detail operational costs in the northern regions versus the eastern provinces. We face 7-month winters, equipment failures due to extreme cold, transportation costs triple what they pay, and worker retention challenges that require higher wages. The current 50-50 split barely covers our margins in good years." "Then perhaps your operations are simply inefficient," the Eastern lawyer said smoothly. "Or perhaps the Eastern provinces have been sheltered from understanding what it actually takes to extract resources in hostile environments." Adrien met her gaze steadily. "We've brought testimonials from 300 workers whose jobs would be eliminated if these restrictions pass. Real people with families who depend on these operations." For 3 days, they negotiated. Adrien presented evidence, countered arguments, and refused to give ground on the fundamental principle that you couldn't unilaterally alter contracts that had been negotiated fairly. Robert and the others provided supporting testimony about the regional economic impact. Even Carver proved surprisingly effective, speaking bluntly about how smaller operations would simply cease to exist under the new terms. The Eastern lawyer was good, very good. She tried every angle, appealing to fairness, suggesting compromise positions that sounded reasonable until you analyzed the numbers, attempting to divide the delegation by offering side deals to individual operators. Adrien shut down each attempt methodically. Not with aggression, but with the same systematic precision he'd applied to engineering problems for 20 years. The difference was that now he could read the human element too. Could see when Walsh was wavering, when the council members were receptive, when the lawyer was overplaying her hand. On the fourth day, Walsh called a recess. "I need to consult with my counsel privately." They waited in an anteroom. Carver paced nervously. Robert sat with his head in his hands. Adrien stood at the window watching the capital's streets and thinking about Eliza back at Hale House, probably worrying, definitely waiting. "We've done all we can," Robert said finally. "Either it worked or it didn't." It worked. Adrien surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. Walsh knows we're right. The question is whether he can politically afford to acknowledge it. 20 minutes later, they were called back in. Walsh looked tired. Against the recommendation of the Eastern Council representative, the lawyer's face tightened. "I'm ruling that the current contract terms remain in place. However, we will be implementing modest new safety requirements and environmental protections that both parties will work together to develop." Relief flooded the anteroom. Robert exhaled sharply. Carver actually smiled. "The key word," Walsh continued, "is together. This proposal emerged because the Eastern Territories feel excluded from Northern prosperity. So here's the compromise. You keep your contracts, but you agree to increase transparency in operations and regular reporting to the Territorial Council. Show them what you're dealing with. Make them understand why the current terms are fair." Adrien nodded. "Acceptable." "And one more thing, Duke Hale." Walsh fixed him with a level stare. "The Eastern Territories will be watching. If it appears you're exploiting workers or damaging the environment recklessly, they'll use it as ammunition to revisit this decision. You've won today. Don't squander it." "Understood, Governor. Thank you." They left the chambers victorious. Outside, Robert clapped Adrien on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "You did it! Damn, I've never seen anything like that. You dismantled every argument they had." "We did it," Adrien corrected. "All of us." "But you led. And you didn't just win, you made them understand why we needed to win." Robert grinned. "The Northern Territories owe you a debt." "They owe us all a debt. We stood together." Adrien glanced at Carver. "Even those of us who didn't particularly like each other managed to put differences aside." Carver snorted. "Don't get sentimental, Hale. I still think you're arrogant and insufferable. The feeling's mutual. But you're good in a fight, I'll give you that." It was as close to friendship as they'd ever come. Adrien decided it was enough. They stayed one more night in the capital to finalize documentation, then headed home. Adrien found himself counting the hours until he'd see Eliza again. The old Adrien would have been calculating efficiency improvements or reviewing contract terms. The new Adrien just wanted to get home to his wife. Eliza was waiting on the steps when the carriages arrived at Hale House. Adrien barely waited for the vehicle to stop before jumping out and pulling her into his arms. "We won." "I know. Marcus got word yesterday. The whole estate's been celebrating." She pulled back to look at him. "You were gone 6 days. You said 5. Documentation took longer than expected. I'm sorry." "You're forgiven. This time." She kissed him. "Come inside. Everyone wants to hear about it." The staff had prepared a celebratory dinner. Adrien found himself recounting the negotiations to a rapt audience, not just the strategic elements, but the moments of tension, the close calls, the satisfaction of watching the Eastern lawyer realize she'd lost. He'd never been much for storytelling, but Eliza prompted him with questions, drawing out details he'd have normally omitted. It felt good, natural, like he was part of something larger than just himself. Later, alone in their room, Eliza asked the question he'd been waiting for. "What happens now?" "Now we implement the safety and environmental requirements. Show the Eastern Territories we're operating responsibly, and we keep doing what we've been doing, managing the operations while actually living our lives." "That's it? No grand expansion plans? No push to double production?" "No." He pulled her close. "I spent 20 years building an empire, and I realized something in the capital, watching the other delegates, listening to Walsh talk about balance and transparency. I already have everything I need, more than I need. The operations are successful. The workers are provided for. And pushing for more would just mean sacrificing what actually matters. Which is? This, us, the life we're building together. He kissed her forehead. I'm done sacrificing human connection for marginal efficiency gains. Done treating my entire existence like an optimization problem. The empire can run at reasonable levels instead of maximum capacity. And I can finally live instead of just managing. Eliza was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm proud of you. For winning the negotiation. For choosing to come home. Winter came early that year. By mid-October, the first heavy snows had arrived, transforming Blackridge Vale into the frozen landscape Adrien had always known. But this time, the cold felt different. Not harsh and isolating, but clean, beautiful, a challenge to survive together rather than endure alone. The timber operations continued at reduced hours. The mines maintained steady production without pushing for records. Adrien worked reasonable days, delegated more effectively, and discovered that the empire didn't collapse when he wasn't personally controlling every detail. In fact, it ran better. Marcus, finally given real authority, implemented improvements Adrien had been too rigid to consider. The workers, seeing their duke actually present and engaged, increased productivity without being pushed. The operations found a sustainable rhythm instead of the constant crisis management Adrien had maintained for years. And in the evenings, Adrien came home to a wife who was no longer fading away. Eliza thrived with his attention, bloomed with his presence. She played piano while he worked in the conservatory beside her. She read poetry aloud while he reviewed modest amounts of paperwork. They took walks through the snow-covered grounds, talking about everything and nothing. They fought sometimes. Real fights with raised voices and slammed doors, and the kind of messy emotion Adrien had spent his life avoiding. But they worked through it, apologized, tried again, learning that conflict wasn't the end of connection. It was just part of the process. The northern families noticed the change. Catherine commented on it during a dinner party in November, pulling Eliza aside while the men discussed regional trade agreements. Whatever you did to him, keep doing it. He's almost likable now. Eliza laughed. I didn't do anything. He did it himself. I just gave him a reason to try. Well, whatever the cause, the effect is remarkable. Robert says he's never seen someone change so fundamentally. Usually people are who they are. People can change if they want to badly enough, and if they have something worth changing for. December brought the deep cold, the kind of freeze that made outdoor work dangerous and kept everyone close to their fires. Adrien and Eliza spent long evenings in the conservatory, where Eliza's plants somehow survived despite the frost coating the outside of the glass walls. They're resilient, she explained when Adrien marveled at it. They've adapted to the cold, learned to survive in conditions that should kill them. Like us. Like us, she smiled. Though we're still learning, still adapting. Is it enough? What we've built? Is anything ever enough? We're not finished, Adrien. We'll never be finished. That's not how this works. She took his hand. But yes, for now, for today, it's enough. On a clear night in late December, when the temperature had dropped below zero and the stars looked close enough to touch, Adrien pulled Eliza outside to look at the northern lights. They stood on the terrace, wrapped in furs, watching green and blue curtains dance across the sky. I never showed you this before, he said. The lights. They happen every winter, but I always just worked through them. Didn't seem worth stopping for. And now? Now I understand what I was missing. He held her closer. I spent so long focused on survival, building, controlling, maintaining, that I forgot to actually live. But this, he gestured at the lights, the frozen landscape, the vast wilderness that was their home. This is what makes survival worth it. Not the empire, not the operations. This, beauty, connection, standing in the cold with someone who makes the cold bearable. That's almost poetic. You've been reading my books, haven't you? Maybe. She laughed, the sound carrying across the frozen grounds. I love you, Adrien Hale, even when you're impossible. Maybe especially then. I love you too. He said it easier now, the words no longer foreign in his mouth. I'm going to mess up, probably regularly. I'll revert to old habits and prioritize wrong things,
and need you to remind me that efficiency isn't the answer to everything. I know, and you'll get frustrated with me, rightfully so, because I'm slow to learn and stubborn about being wrong. I know that too. But I'm not giving up on us, on learning how to be human, on building something real instead of just functional. He turned her to face him. You saved my life, Eliza. Not by managing my household or bearing my children or fulfilling contract obligations, but by refusing to disappear, by making me see what I was losing, by being brave enough to leave when staying would have killed you. You saved your own life. I just gave you a reason to try. Then we saved each other. They stood together in the December cold, watching the northern lights paint the sky. Behind them, Hale House blazed with warm light. Inside, the staff were preparing for the winter festival, a celebration the estate had maintained for decades, but Adrien had rarely attended. This year would be different. This year, he'd celebrate alongside everyone else, because he'd finally learned what his father had known all along. Control wasn't strength, walls weren't safety, and the thing you feared losing most was usually the thing most worth keeping. The Northern Territories were harsh, unforgiving, beautiful in their brutality. And somewhere in that frozen wilderness, Duke Adrien Hale and his wife Eliza had stopped merely surviving and started living. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but together. And in the end, that was the only kind of strength that mattered. Not the strength to endure alone, but the courage to be vulnerable enough to need someone, to let them in, to choose connection over control and risk over safety and love over the cold, empty fortress of self-protection. The empire would survive. It always had. But now Adrien understood that empire without life was just organized emptiness. Achievement without connection was just numbers in a ledger. Success without love was just another form of death. He'd spent 20 years learning how to build walls. It had taken Eliza just over a year to teach him how to let them fall. The northern lights faded as dawn approached. Adrien and Eliza stayed outside until the first pale light touched the eastern mountains. Then, finally, they went inside, together, to face whatever came next. Not as Duke and Duchess performing prescribed roles, but as two flawed, stubborn, occasionally impossible people who'd chosen each other, who'd fought for each other, who'd learned, painfully and slowly, that the hardest journey wasn't across frozen wilderness or through political battles or up the steep climb of building an empire. The hardest journey was the one from isolation to connection, from fear to trust, from the safety of being untouchable to the terrifying vulnerability of being seen, and they'd made that journey together. Were still making it. Would keep making it for as long as they had. In a land where survival meant everything, they discovered something worth surviving for: each other.